words about the book, the project, and the author is University Press Director Lila Selzer.
It's very exciting even to hear his calendar of events. I feel like there's so many things with fascinating intersections of arts and culture and music and history going on in Jackson, so it makes me very happy and proud for the community. And I'm thrilled that the University Press of Mississippi can be a part of that in the many different forms that it can take. And so I want to say a little bit about our author, Bruce Levingston. I was fortunate enough to meet him a little over 2 years ago when he had come to the press and said he was interested in Marie, or as he says it, Mari Hall, how she pronounced her name, and that he was searching out the paintings and we really needed to do a book about this. And so, you know, his background, many of you will know him as an incredibly accomplished and renowned concert pianist and composer, but this was delving a little more deeply into his Mississippi roots and his deep interest in the arts. In his career, he's collaborated a number of times with various cultural institutions, including MoMA, the Whitney, both in New York, the Aspen Institute and Music Festival, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and of course, for this particular show, the Mississippi Museum of Art. He's the director of the Music Foundation Premier Commission Incorporated, and currently he's serving at the University of Mississippi as the Barksdale Honors College Artist in Residence. So that's the background for what brings him to this particular project. I give him so much credit for seeing that the show needed to happen and that a book needed to come out at the same time. And one of the fascinating things, and I think Bruce probably will talk a little bit more about it, he was the force who went and sought out and found many of these paintings that were in private collections. And in some ways it sounds like a good detective story. You know, he would go into a home, you know, see one painting, and you know, in talking with the owner, they might say, well, you might check with so-and-so. I think they might have a painting. And so it sort of went on in this fashion, and you know, single-handedly he worked to find these paintings, secure a photographer to get them photographed, you know, where they were, or to bring them to the museum. And I just am very grateful that he took on this mission, because without his efforts, you would not have the book looking at as it does, or the amazing show with so many works gathered together for the first time down at the museum. So I'll let Bruce tell you a little bit more about the origin story of the project and some of the more interesting things that he's learned along the way. So I'll turn it over to Bruce.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. So I just want to say that this has been one of the most exciting things I've ever done in my life. I've made my professional career outside of the state, and then came back in 2008 to help my mother a little bit as in a final illness, and we would talk about Marie Hall's paintings, and it was through my mother and grandmother that I really came to know her work. As I would walk around Delta State in Cleveland, I'd see her works in homes and see the flowers that she painted so often, but also the abstracts. We all shared, and I think share in Mississippi, a love of the beautiful land and landscape and the beautiful flowers everywhere. I grew up with a family that cared about those things and art, and it sort of all come together. I tell people one of the things that I tried to do for my mom was, as I would walk my dog each night, I would clip flowers. I'm telling you all something. You shouldn't tell the people including flowers. I would take flowers, you know, I would see something I thought she would like, a magnolia or beautiful gardenia, and I'd bring them. Finally, she said, "Where are you getting these?" And I said, well, she said, "Well, of course, you know, any real member of the Delta Garden Club understands that you need a sharp pair of scissors and a fast car." So this has been a wonderful treat to rekindle friendships and relationships back here in Mississippi and to celebrate who we are. And no one celebrated who we are more than Mary Hall. And she did say, not Marie, but Mary. And so I will try to take you through some of her life. Let's see if I can actually do this now. Do we lower it a little bit? Yeah, oh, that's great. There she is, with one of her dogs in the midst. This would be in 1966, surrounded by so many paintings from different eras, and we're going to explore that. But she was a woman of indomitable energy and passion, and she loved dogs, so picked this one up for the photograph, and we're going to talk about all these paintings. So the next is, this is Mary at about, I would say, here she's in her mid-20s, and she's painted a self-portrait. She received a degree from Belhaven in piano and loved music, but she knew that she had this passion for painting and wanted to pursue it, and more than just as a hobby. She felt she had something to give, but knew she had to travel to find even greater teachers that she could find. There was one very fine teacher here who encouraged her to go to Pennsylvania and New York, and she did. And so here, this is an early piece, very touching, because you see this hopeful look in her eyes. She knew there was more, and remember, born in 1890, she couldn't even vote, and women were really not expected to go and travel as she did and do the things that she wanted to do. So she went, and for many years at the Pennsylvania Academy of Art, which is the finest teaching institution in the country for artists, women were not even allowed to paint nudes, but then a few years before she came, they were, and here's one of her studies. She studied anatomy. Here you see you're breaking down the muscles. This was found in her sketchbooks that are in the archives of the museum. And just so you know, much of the research that I did for the book, I also used these archives, which is such a treasure right here. Here it's 1925, and she's already become a pretty good painter, and it's almost an Art Nouveau style, playful. She and her husband, Emmett, he's a famous architect around here, did a lot of these great buildings in Jackson, went to Cornell. They loved to travel, loved to explore together, and they were in Florida, and she saw parrots, and so she loved wildlife, so she painted these, and these were thought to be lost, and I love this part of Mississippi. My mother's bridge partner said, wait, I think I know where these are. Here's the number, and the man that bought these from her lived in Jackson, was a doctor, and his daughter now lives in Arkansas, so I made the call. We've got them, photographed them. They're here in Jackson. This is one of the greatest paintings of the period. This doesn't even begin to do justice to what it's like. The paint just pops off the canvas. It's so thick and richly painted. And also, it's like Audubon. She's capturing these images of wildlife in their habitats. It's quite powerful. And here you see it's Marie Ahol, and she's it's Atkinson. She's born. You'll see M.A. Sometimes she's hiding her gender early on. We're going to pop back and forth a little bit in time. That's a close-up, a wonderful piece. Here now, 1929, 4 years later, a year before she was passing through Texas on one of those trips that they would take, and she saw the yucca plants, and she made a quick sketch. And the sketch is in the book. You can see what she did. But she remembered this in the setting, and it was time for this competition that would earn her $2,500 in 1929, which was a lot. And so instead of painting what would be thought to work for that kind of competition, for that a woman might turn in at the time, dainty flower or something, she painted this pretty tough painting of the yucca plant, and they were bowled over by that. And if you see M.A. Hall, let's see if that thing, oh, okay, I hit what I thought was the,
Hit the wrong button again.
hit it again? All right, so there's a pointer there that now I'm not going to use. But you see, M.A. Hull, she was hiding her gender, and it may have contributed to her win. Yeah, even as I grew up, there's a little tangent, but there were pianists that would say, oh, you know, women cannot play as well as men. And I thought, wow, that's ridiculous. Because I was thinking Alicia Del Roca and you know, all these fantastic, Ruth Pareto, amazing pianists that I knew. So I thought that was ridiculous then, and as I do now. And then there were painters that said the same thing. And of course, she paints as well as this idea of difference. But one figure was talking about that I think women were often taught to paint in a certain way as well, and she just didn't have any time for that. She painted as she thought she should. So she wins the award, she takes the money with her husband's cheering her on, and says, I'm going to Europe and I'm going to see all the great museums and I'm going to study with some great figures, and she does. And the first thing she starts to see, architecture, she's certainly not seeing in Jackson. And here, this is Uzerish, and she sees Chateau, and paints like Cezanne did. If you go to the exhibit, you'll see the strokes, and it's almost like Cubism. And she certainly was seeing Picasso, and this is very much like the Reservoir that he had done just a few years before. And so she probably saw it. And the sense of the architecture of the entire painting, it's a tight little study, it's very beautiful. This was a lady taking care of the place where she stayed when she was in court. And I always looked at this in a kind of romantic way. I thought, isn't that sweet? She painted this, and it's beautiful and haunting, and the hands gnarled, and evidently she thought this woman didn't smell so good, and that she was a little grumpy and scratched, and so it wasn't romantic at all. But so I can't look at it quite the same way, but it's actually a beautiful piece, and you know, it's very much of a period that she's painting like this. This is the great Barbican Fortress, and you see all the use of colors, so many different colors, inspired by the Fauvists in Europe at the time. It was a period between 1905 and 7 that took place, but she was catching up with what she hadn't seen before. And so in a way she was going back, and that's what she was learning first. And then even if she would see Picasso as his own, she would take that, and it would take years after, she said, for her to absorb all of that and modern art. But here, wonderful, powerful oil painting. Another, the Chateau Uzerish, very beautiful, lush use of the paint and the structure. Now another location, Sancerre, it's beautiful watercolor, and this is the thing you find. She handles so many different types of painting so well, and sometimes people can't paint very well with watercolor. It's very tricky, and she did it brilliantly, and I think a very effective piece. Another street scene, and she was willing to just use a quick gesture. She was a very, very fast painter, and she would have sketched that and painted it in an hour or less. Big oil painting. She would have painted this outdoors as well. What's interesting is she not only is the absolutely staggering use of color. This is very Van Gogh-like, those greens and things but pulling your eye down that alley and what she's doing with shadow. And this takes some kind of thinking about the canvas and structure, and she had that. And this talks about, we're talking about a great virtuoso painter, that some of this cannot be taught. She's probably on the train and she sees the pigs in the countryside. Boom, she painted it quickly, just like lightning, and it's just a delightful piece, but it captures some of what she was seeing. This is in Granada. Again, you see the kind of cubism a little bit, and different location, and just the quick brush strokes to indicate a window or a little, a poplar. Marvelous piece. This great oil painting, very much like the Uzerish Chateau, it's a type of almost cubism there. She's willing to let you not see a lot, and I love that, and at the very right, how she is already going a little bit into abstract painting. The seeds were there even then, and she was willing, and there were people pushing in this direction, and we not to be so realistic, but it's just a lovely composition. if you can remember in your mind's eye this structure with the high horizon there and the groundwork here of the poplars in the foreground, remember this structure. You're going to see it even as late as 1970. She keeps coming back to this. This was part of the DNA of how she painted. But it's marvelous. It evolves and changes. We'll revisit this. Here she's in Morocco. The great changes of color. Also, can you imagine? She's alone. She's with a group, but no relatives. And there she is on this trip. All of these places. The travel was not so easy and pretty rough, and she stayed in all kinds of iffy accommodations. And there she went to Morocco and captured that. There it is in Mahaligan. And I think marvelous the play of color and putting those figures right in the front. She learned that at the Pennsylvania Academy of Art to place things in the foreground. It pulls you actually to the back. So marvelous understanding of how to shape a canvas. There's another scene. And now we come back. Just before, I wanted to step back 1 year before 1929, because at the end of this trip, she was going to be joined by her husband, and the Depression hit. And Mr. Hull said, look, you should stay. There's nothing you can do here. It's hit. Take that money and learn as much as you can. You might not get to come back. Enjoy that trip. And I'm just going to stay here. And so he allowed her to do that. It was a remarkable relationship and friendship. And so she did stay. Finally, when she came back, she saw things were quite different. But even before she left, she painted this portrait of Annie Smith. And this is significant because she would later do a series of figures that she knew, people who worked in the area. These were real people working hard, trying to survive. Annie Smith happened to work for the Hulls, and she captures this figure. You don't necessarily know what she does, except maybe this around her head is telling you something. But the color and the play in the background, it's just an explosion of joy. And remember, it's 28, so they don't know what's coming. And just a tour de force in its own right. Now, it turns out that Annie was very tough with the Hulls. She wouldn't let them play the radio or cards on Sunday. And that strong jawline tells me she was pretty strict. All right, so now in 1930, it's the Depression, and although she's trying to make a living, she's also going to make a whole series of paintings she really can't sell, but she's just doing them because she has to do it. And it's very interesting that she did this. And she would hang on to these paintings a long, long time. She knew they were important. This is Melissa. Melissa also worked for them, and not at the same time. Andrew Bucci, the great painter, said he was terrified of Melissa. Bucci was Maury Hull's favorite student, and they influenced one another a lot. And he would go to the door for lessons. He's a little, teenager from Vicksburg, and meekly knock on the door, and that Melissa would answer, "Oh, you again." So, all right, she was formidable, but what I love is that Mrs. Hull captures this, and also a bit of sadness in her face. And again, we don't know what she does. She just paints her in this direct, matter-of-fact way. It's wonderful. And this is what's significant. She painted black and white figures exactly the same, with dignity and respect, and was not paying attention to race as an issue. Kind of important and powerful, and often figures were painted and depicted, according to their societal station, throughout art history. And Mrs. Hull just takes these people and paints them in this quite direct, remarkable way, and captures something inside. Here is Mandy in this watercolor, went to a national watercolor show, and it's also direct, based on, it's absolutely a staggering piece. It's at the museum. If you can see it up close, it's just remarkable. Very beautiful. This is Solomon Gross. He was born into slavery. And can you see what's to the side? What are those? Anyone know? They're the empty cotton balls. I actually didn't realize it until I'd seen the painting in person. This was just discovered before we went to publication. We got the shot of it, but I wasn't there. And that's the empty cotton balls. And this remarkable face she captured with so much, I don't know, insight and sensitivity, and a great work. And on the back, which she's making a progression, she wrote the old slave, and then at the bottom, an American telling. And that's going to play into into the next painting. This is John Wesley Washington. She knew him well. She painted him and drew him in different settings. He, I think, lived near them and probably did work for them. And he was 94 years old in this painting, born in 1847, and she gave it the title An American Citizen. Pretty significant. And I think the way it's painted, again, he's just looking directly at you. You see his cuffs are undone. It seems rather simple, but it's not. This painting is one of her greatest, and she knew it, and kept it for a long time, and made sure that the person who got it would take care of it, and then that person would give it to the museum, and had told the museum this is going to the museum ultimately. She knew this had significance, and it was in a quiet, but I think very powerful way that she was making a statement about equality. So I love this piece. I've also commissioned a piece of music. I often do this, the things that there's a history of this in music and art, where one type of artist inspires another. The great French painter Delacroix painted Chopin in Paris. My friend Philip Glass wrote a beautiful portrait of the painter, it's a musical composition of Chuck Close, who had painted Philip, and we premiered those and showed the paintings and played the music. And this, I thought, would it be wonderful to have a piece of music that somehow captures the bittersweet quality that's in this painting and life. So I commissioned it from one of the great composers in the country, and I'm premiering it this spring at Carnegie Hall, if you happen to be in New York. Hope you'll come. All right, this is one of the iconic sharecroppers, and the background shows not where she actually painted it. She painted that, it was in her imagination, that this was in his mind's eye and in his soul, that this is the land that he may have farmed or may have lost. And these men would come to her and want a little work, trying to earn a nickel or a dime here or there. And I'm not kidding, this was the deal then. And then she would say, well, I'll give you what I can, or maybe I'll give you breakfast, but if I do, would you sit for me? And she'd find a little work. And she didn't have a lot of money either, but they would sit for her. And she, I thought, captured, there's a song with Marshall, what is it, the song?
Oh, it's by Jason Isbell. It's called Elephant. There's a line in there where there's a cancer patient, and he describes her by having sharecropper eyes.
Sharecropper
and
eyes.
I didn't understand it until I saw the exhibit and saw the sharecroppers and the kind of the emptiness in their eyes.
Yes, it's a sadness. This is the period. You'll see that the eyes change a little bit as the years move through the Depression, but there's something incredibly sad in his face, of course. This figure, Henry Louis Graggart, wonderful face, and he figures in two of her works. And I know his name because his granddaughter contacted me and was trying to find this painting, and I knew where it was, and I arranged for the family to see it. And she said, you know, his daughter is still alive, and she's 92. She's completely with it. She can't see, but she has so many stories. So I said, well, would you interview her? And she was all in a phone conversation. Interview her and write it down. She said yes, and so she did. And it's a beautiful essay about how this man was talking with Mrs. Hall, and she wanted to paint him, and he said, well, I'll do this if you will agree to give my daughter art lessons. And that was the swap. And so she would sit for him, he would sit for Mrs. Hall, and the daughter said, but he absolutely never wore overalls. He was always properly dressed, so she put those overalls on him. And he didn't like it, and he absolutely said, I was not, and this is called Tenant Farmer is the name of his painting. He said, I was not a tenant farmer. I rented land, I was not a tenant farmer. And, but it's a fantastic piece, and you can see it in person. And then a little sideline to the issue of the essay. I got it, and the first thing that caught my eye was this mention of Mrs. Hall's dogs. I'm a huge dog lover, and I thought, well, finally I'm going to find out about the dogs. I've heard so much from the students about those dogs, and so I'm reading, and I come, and yes, Mrs. Hall had 2 little dogs. I hated those dogs. Every time I would go and try to get my brushes and the turpentine rags, they would bite me. And so, all right. Interesting things one learns. Here you see the double, and this is another sharecropper. She did it as a solo, and then she put them together. And take a look at the hands. It's fantastic controls. The hand part is the most difficult thing to paint. And then she puts them in this really, it's supposed to be of the period of realism, but it's also a mythical kind of painting. And so again, something just that, it's when I hear a piece of music, I can analyze it for you, and I can tell you what harmonies are doing and why this melodic thing works, but I can't tell you why it really works. It's something, it's the magic, and there's magic in that painting. And so this is one of her last of the series. It's called The Eggman, and there's a kind of look of resignation on his face. I love that. It's towards the end of the Depression, and I'm hoping that there's hope now for him. And he brought the eggs to her house. It's a different era. All right, to really make a living, she painted flowers, but as you'll see, she wasn't just any kind of flower painter. I mean, this is done in 1920, and this painting is absolutely a tour de force, and it's often we see the single pop, but this is the double arrangement, and see the reflections and the control of the paint, and there's so many dabs of paint within one petal. And she, of course, learned this from the Impressionists, because when you stand back, it makes it, look at the yellow flower. Many, many kinds of yellow. She loved pink. She said, I love any color as long as it's pink. But she had, Robert Bird said, she had hundreds of shades of pink. And this, so you kind of see this control. And she studied the anatomy of these paints. So we'll go through the flowers and look at the magnolias. But she was known for her magnolias. Of course, everyone in Mississippi wanted to have a magnolia, but their magnolias and their magnolias, and this is extraordinary, this piece. Another, I love how she makes some in the corner dying. This is almost surreal. The pottery, often sheer water pottery, she would use sometimes the same box, but she had many, and she would move them around. And it's a lovely, she was a great friend of Walter Anderson and his wife. Mrs. Anderson said, well, she tolerated me, but she really liked him. The dying magnolias, that's extraordinary. Great piece. Japanese magnolia. This, now we're later, and it's a still life. She's seeing Matisse, she's flattening out things, she's playing with design, but also what she does, just the sheer joy with color. And she was a great colorist. I mean, she said, I'm a lyrical, romantical painter. And you see it there, the swirl of color, and this you cannot teach, this control. I said to Marshall, as we were talking, when he read it, I think, for me, her use of color is like how I hear the notes in music. It's somehow, when I hear music, I hear color. It's called synesthesia. I'm not sure how that works, except I hear it in terms, but Mozart also heard in color. A major was a certain color to him. Beethoven always said, that B minor was a very black key, very dark. And indeed, if you listen to Bach E minor Mass, it's very dark. So we all have these associations. But for me, I don't know. This is very E major. Right. This spectacular piece is called The Tangle of Lilies, and it belongs to Aubrey Lucas. Do you all know Aubrey? So a great educator in the state. And when I was a little boy, he was the president of Delta State, and I would just burst in his door and play some music on the piano and run out, and they were really great to me. And he was one of her biggest supporters at the time. He supported the book that came out, published by University Press, and then helped Delta State acquire works and put on exhibitions. But he wanted to work of his own and went to her, and she said, well, go through these paintings and find something. So he found this. It shows what kind of eye he had. And this is one of her great works from 1968, Tangle of Lilies. And he tells me that after they made the financial arrangement, he was taking it to the car and opened the door, and she didn't like the way he was putting it. She said, now look, if you're going to put it in that way, I'm just taking it back into the house. And so he said she's very strict. And the issue of money, let me say, every single day I'm here, I learn a new story. She had an interesting relationship with money. I mean, she didn't live for it at all, because had she lived for it, she would have been a different kind of painter. She would paint the same thing over and over again, and she didn't do that. But she definitely wanted to be paid for her work, and sometimes she knew she had to maneuver to make that happen. And so one of her relatives just told me that she was a Christian Scientist, but she didn't want anyone to know she actually did go to the doctor. And so one of the doctors that was taking care of her very kindly met her in a private time where no one could possibly see that she was there. And she said, you've been so kind to me. I wish you would come to the house and just choose something. And she would often let young people, they would visit her and she would, please take something. And she would have a little stack of minor works that she would let them do. Anyway, the doctor came, and in fact, he did choose something, and she gave him a $250 bill. Yes. This great painting, The Blue Flowers, belonged to Lee McCarty and Pop. And they had, as you know, McCarty's great family, great friends of hers, and had a fantastic collection. That collection that they have, if you could see it, the McCarty's things were hidden around treasures at that place. And this was never on display for the public. But I heard they had it, and Lee arranged for me to take the photograph. And it's absolutely stunning. And it's about 5.5 feet tall. Really big. She did it in 1970, which means she was 80 years old. We're going to pop back in time. It's 1929. We're going to show you how she depicted other figures. This is a marvelous work. The gentleman in France, again, she's willing to already paint it somewhat abstractly. Look at the hand. This lady is just a little John Singer Sargent. She loved redheads, and I love this painting. This is really romantic, and a beautiful neckline, fantastic. She had control over so many styles. This is the little redhead. She loved redheads, and she called it the little redhead. And she kept it a long time. She had a high price on it. It's a very small painting, but I love this painting. Again, I can't tell you exactly why. It's something just magical about it. And if anyone can tell me this is, I'm going to give you a prize. Yes, it's Jimmy Creekmore. And does it say ceasefire up there? His name may be up there. But this painting, this is way before ceasefire, of course. Little Wade and little Jimmy were taken over by their mom to have their paintings done. And Jimmy told me that after this was done, she turned to him and said, okay, with or without? And he said, with or without what? And she said, freckles. Because he's a redhead, he had freckles. And his mother quickly said, no freckles. So there's Jimmy and there's Wade. We love that. Okay. Their travels to the Rockies. She loved to paint again. Here in Mississippi swamps, way over. The beautiful the Biloxi boats. And here in the foreground of the great trees, and you see the moss, beautiful, beautiful work. She did lots of these. This is called Mississippi Farm. It's a wonderful piece. It was found in Washington State in a garage sale for $100, and it sold at Neal about 10 or 12 years ago for $10,000. This is kind of great. And she would have loved that. And so it's called Mississippi Farm. These were scenes she would paint of what she saw, in our state, about people living quite modestly in real life families, laundry day. This is a great one of the sunset. She did this in the 60s. Again, the control of color is so wonderful and very, very beautiful. This similar piece done 2 years later. It's called Sunset Times. And there's a pine tree, but it's very similar. You see a tangle of lilies. It's not a lily. The lilies really were lilies, and this is a different perspective. This is at Stafford Springs, wonderful where the art colony met. Terrific. Painting reminds me so much of Milton Avery's work. Control of the structure, and her use of strokes now is very, very bold, much bigger instead of this. This is a very large painting, and she would have gotten this looking at de Kooning and Hoffman, and she loved Hans Hoffman and recognized him as one of the greatest teachers in the country. Here, we're going to pop back as this will take you to the finish line, as she started exploring what was going on in this modern art as she absorbed it. This is a study, but it's a still life, and it's really effective, where she's obviously looked at Picasso, and she's trying to figure out, I can do that, she says to herself, and she can. And she does this wonderful cubistic piece, and you see the little arms there, and she picks up there, and somehow it balances, and it's crazy, but it works. This great piece, you see Matisse, and it's called Rhines, and it's at the museum. Both of those are at the museum, and now she's flattened out the canvas and the perspective, but I mean, that's pretty remarkable work. Here, Andrew Buccia actually worked on it with her. They would paint together sometimes in studies, and he was showing her things he learned in Chicago. And so here, it's really about design, as is this. She would put the ducks around in a circle and play with them and position them, and using a little pointillism there in the background. And it's a study. She's playing around, but it's a beautiful piece, and I can't help but be happy when I see it. This is Fishing Pier, and this is again one of those. She was fascinated by the Gulf Coast, and so you get the wonderful dark scenery there, and a little bit of the water reflection, and the complexity of this is just staggering. You have to see it personally. It's a marvelous piece, and that's 1950. Here, through the 50s, she was fascinated by the sails, but she used the sail idea of the sails of the boats as an excuse really for color study, and these blocks of color, again, very much inspired by Hans Hoffman. This is a beautiful piece called Night Sail. This is Morning Sail. Very beautiful, very large. She was interested in Chinese calligraphy. Can you see how she put it into what she also calls a garden study, but there's the calligraphy. It's a beautiful, and gouache and watercolor. She mixed up these mediums. This is an exhibit, another one, Penumbra. Very wonderful work. This was also by the McCartys, called Flight. She was fascinated by birds. She did many studies before she did this, different settings, but this is the one where everything comes together. She lets go of color in her brushstrokes. It's very bold, and I mean, look, the use of the color is it's everything imaginable going on in there. Many, hundreds of shades going. I've seen her palettes. They're amazing, the mixture of colors what she did. All right. Here, this is 1961. Now she's really in an abstract. This is called Waterfall, but it's really outright abstract and brilliant. She knew Andy Warhol and Levingston, what they were doing. Jackson Pollock, Rothko. This is this wonderful study. Yellow fog, she calls it, but it's, again, just a great color study. Look at the texture. So now she's becoming bolder. This is called Great Tree. It's an ink wash. She lets the paint do what it will itself now. She's not trying to control everything. Here, this is called, originally it was Landscape at Ruins. She scratched out Landscape and just called it Ruins. Patty Carr Black tells me it may be, she was such good friends, not only Patty, but Mrs. Hull, of Eudora Welty's, that she probably knew Welty's photograph of Windsor, and that this is Windsor, and that makes sense, and that you can kind of see in the distance. But it's a wonderful piece. But if you remember, see at the bottom, you remember in the early painting I told you to keep your mind on what was going on. There's the high landscape again, and there's the same structure that she was using in 1929. And this is very powerful work, and you see the bands of color. Same year, 1967. Well, before I say that, let me say, Patty also told me, as you know, Patty was here, a great art historian, one of the Mississippians that has done so much for all of us, and she was very helpful to me as I was writing the book. And she said she and Miss Welty actually knew that they were not supposed to accept a luncheon invitation at Mrs. Hall's because her culinary expertise was questionable. And that sometimes, because she loved the dog so much, there would be the dog food, and then there was this, and then there was the blender. I'll just move on. And so here, this is the great blue landscape. You see the bands of color. Now she's just taken away everything. It's just simply the color and the structures of banding that she got from Rothko, and the signature of Lowenstrup. And this is such a simple piece in a certain way and not, but it's a landmark piece for her. And she's going to use this in every great work that she'll paint after, to the end of her life. So the blue landscape is a remarkable work, very beautiful. And there is bright fields, and you see the banding that she used in blue landscape, and now she's as if she could take her hands and just push those bands up a little bit here, and push it here, and push it here, and she's doing this with her brush and with her eye. And again, it's one of those works. We can analyze it, but why? It works, and it's so beautiful. And it's the piece, of course, that inspired me for the title. And it's bright fields, and of course, fields of color she's referring to, but also the fields of Mississippi that inspired her again and again. And leaves of grass. What a fantastic piece. Okay, same year, she takes away everything. And now we just have the sheer color in the band, but even within the color, a lot going on there. Many shades going on within shades. This is called Delta Sunset, and for me, it's very powerful because growing up and seeing that the flatness of the land can seem very one-dimensional and simple, and yet it changes seasonally and day by day according to the light. And that blinding white she's got up there, you just have to know the delta. That for me, this has a lot of significance, and it's a fantastic work. Now, I'm going to take you to the last three works she ever painted. That were her last three great masterpieces. Not that she ever painted. She painted through some years till she died, other smaller pieces. But this is the last great series. It's called Mississippi Spring, Mississippi River, and Mississippi Red Clay. And so this is the Mississippi Spring. She takes the bandings, and now she's putting the signature vertical stroke. And I'll show you, this is Mississippi River. It's quite beautiful. And about 24 by 36, like this. And you can see them all together in the museum show, which is amazing that we have all three at the same time. And they were shown together as a triptych, and she won a great award for this. And William Haney, who helped Malcolm write the book, said, well, what is the abstract? She would say, this is abstract lyricism, is what she called this. He said, well, what is the abstract, and what is the lyricism? She said, well, these bands, I paint the bands first, like in Delta Sunset, and that's the abstract. And he said, well, what are those little marks? That's the lyrical. And finally, the last one. And of course, it was pink, her favorite color. And it's so beautiful. And this was a significant work that she painted, and the fact that she made this also a tribute to her home state, I think, is significant. And for me, it wasn't just the painting, it was the sense of doing something to celebrate who we are as Mississippians, who we can be, to celebrate our past but also our future, and she was all about that. So this has been an honor and pleasure to study this great artist's work and get to know her and talk to her, talk to you about her. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions, we have a few more minutes. Yes, sir.
All these pictures you've shown, they at the museum, art museum?
About 95% are at the museum.
And how long have they been?
They'll be there to January 10th, and then they're going to the Ogden Museum in New Orleans. So, but you can see them now. They're all up, and I think it's a good show. I mean, I'm biased, obviously, but I think it's okay. Thank you, Marshall. We got a second from Marshall.
I'm a docent. It's a good show.
Thank you. Thank you. In person, too, you'll be struck by the roughness of some of the paintings. I mean, Robert Burns said it was probably because he was at the era we talked this way. He said she was thought to paint more like a man. But again, whether this was part of the way that people were taught, I'm not sure. But it was a kind of, there is a roughness to the paint, to the strokes. And she said she got up and painted at 4 in the morning. She wouldn't be disturbed then. I don't think she slept a lot. And she was taught to paint in the dark when she went to France, that they would be painting outside, and that she would have to remember what the colors really looked like, not by what she was seeing on the tip of the brush or on the palette or on the canvas, but in her mind and here. Interesting, though. And there are a lot of night paintings. Any other questions? Yes.
I had one more. Go ahead.
But this, I'll come back.
Where do those last 3 hang permanently?
The last, well, okay, so Mr. Haney, who's an art critic and publisher, bought them, and then his daughter is married to Kent Lovelace, and the Lovelaces have them, and so they really are still with the family that originally bought them from her. But right now, you can see them all together at the museum, and it's a rare thing to see these 3 together. They're absolutely staggering. Yes, sir.
I was wondering, what year, what age was she when she changed from realistic art to abstract type?
The thing is that I would say probably really 50 years old when she started going more into abstract. Maybe she started a little bit earlier. I think that she was kind of getting there in her 40s. But at 50, she started moving into abstract, but she would go back and paint flowers. If someone in 1966, the Mississippi Arts Commission asked her to do a floral for a family, and she certainly took the commission and did one of her greatest florals. It looks very traditional in the sense of like the structure of what she was doing in the 30s, but with kind of the flair of color and brushstrokes that she was doing in the 60s. But it was not abstract at all. It was definitely figurative work and a still life. So she could go back and forth, and she would also paint portraits. I mean, she painted Jim Eastland's portrait. And I had letters that I found right here where she's talking to him, and she said, well, we haven't met yet, but could you tell me about your complexion? Is it olive? Is it florid? She actually asked him, do you like to wear your glass to keep them off? I so want to meet you in person so that I could get, she said, I want this to be of quality, but she had been commissioned to do the portrait. And so the exchange is very interesting. They had a lot of respect for one another, but it was very interesting that she was trying, we can't find that portrait I call Woods Eastland, and no one knows where it is, but we're going to find it. But she was taking commission.
Did she paint any dogs?
Okay, in passersby, I just didn't want to seem like I was too dog crazy. There's a dog, and this is interesting, you would think that she might have, she certainly could have made a good living painting dogs. Everyone loves their pet painted. Very, very few. She did a few sketches. Now and then there's a tail somewhere. But she really doesn't paint the dogs. And there's one painting that I really have been, I'm trying to find, so if you all know, it's Bruce at Ole Miss. .edu. It's called The Prowlers, and the Prowlers are two cats. And there's a photograph of the Prowlers in the Clarion Ledger from 1966 that I saw, but I can't find it. I think it's in Arkansas somewhere. So, but not a lot of animals. I think that was a very private thing for her. It's interesting that she did this way.
How long did she stay in Europe, and did she travel with somebody?
So she joined a group led by a particular painter who took these tours, and they were working tours where they were really rigorous, and you would stop in places and take all of your canvases, you would buy canvases in Paris and this and that, and you would go out to the countryside and paint in the morning. They would paint in the morning and in the afternoon, and then sometimes at night. I mean, it's hard working. And this lasted, her trip was essentially from May into November. So it was a long trip. And she, again, Emmett was supposed to join her, and then didn't. But she got a lot out of it. She went to every great museum she could possibly go to. So, yes, sir.
Have you tried to compile an inventory of her paintings?
Do you mean as a permanent record?
Yeah.
Well, more or less, yes.
I own one of her magnolias that she gifted to my father, because he used to work for Pinnacle.
Wow. Well, it's like I said, it's either, if you know my last name is Levingston, so it's bruce.levingston, if you say it right, at gmail.com. This is pretty easy. It's got a lot of stuff on the internet, or you just, if you really can't read, it's Bruce at Ole Miss. .edu. And it'll get to me if you write me. Tell me your story, and I would put it in this. We aren't trying to create a catalog to know what's where. I mean, since this book, so many people have let me know pieces, and some of the pieces, it's interesting, the pieces that people she was connected to, that she had some kind of relationship with, are often very different, unusual, and special, so I'd love to see.
Well, I can remember going to her house in the late 50s and the 60s, and that first picture you showed with all the paintings, her house was even more in disarray with paintings just all over the place.
That's what I was
Chat
saying.
deep and
I hope you didn't have lunch.
I don't recall ever eating there, so I think that's not it.
So thank you, everybody. It's been wonderful.